Hi, Rachel Mead with Enhanced Prep here. Thanks for spending some time with me today as we discuss standardized testing in the world of college admissions. We're going to make sure that you completely understand test required, test recommended, test optional, test blind, and you're able to determine the best route or course of action moving forward. There are still a handful of colleges that do require either the SAT or the ACT get submitted as part of the college application process. It is only about 4% of the colleges around the country. There are a handful of highly competitive schools, as well as a couple of HBCUs, and the state of Florida does require either the SAT or the ACT. We also have schools that are test blind. In terms of test blind, that means that regardless of if SAT or ACT scores are submitted as part of the application, the college or university in no way, shape, or form is going to look at those scores. There are currently 84 test blind colleges and universities throughout the United States, many of those within the UC or Cal State system within California. Now we move into where things get a little bit more gray, and that's the test optional, test recommended. These two terms need to be considered the same. And what I mean by that is if a college is saying that they are test optional, it means that they would like to see scores, and they're going to evaluate the student based upon the scores, and they're going to be comparing that student's application with the scores to another student who may have chosen not to submit their scores. So anytime there's more data for a college to look at, which means the SAT or the ACT super score, composite score, test submission, the colleges really enjoy having one more piece of data to use in terms of helping to determine if that student is a good fit for their college or university. So when you see test optional on the list, it's important to understand that one of the things that the college or university may also be doing is evaluating the student's academic curiosity. The same way they look at, did the student take AP or IB classes if they had the opportunity to do so? Did they take dual credit enrollment when they had the opportunity to do so? Even though we're not requiring this student to take either the SAT or the ACT, are they still choosing to put in the effort, time, commitment, dedication in order to make sure that they're putting their best version of themselves forward with the best score that they're able to achieve? Schools will also still give very strong weight to merit-based scholarship opportunities and evaluation based upon SAT and ACT scores. There are also other merit-based scholarship opportunities outside of the university itself, potentially, that do evaluate based upon SAT and ACT scores. It's important to remember that even within the world of test optional, not all schools are created equally. What do we mean by that? Well, it says that, hey, there's some schools that are test optional that a smaller percentage of students choose to submit their scores to. For example, being in Washington, I happen to know that the University of Washington is one of those colleges or universities where scores are not submitted as often, only about 25% of the time. So there the student has a little bit more breathing room in terms of their opportunities or their potential, making the decision in terms of whether or not they're going to submit their score. There are definitely universities that have a much higher occurrence of the students of the population generally submitting their scores. Looking at UT Austin, Duke, a lot of the Ivies, UNC, these are all universities that typically 75% or more of the students that apply to these schools are submitting either their SAT or their ACT score. So that means it becomes that much more competitive or that much more important that students applying to those schools take the time to make sure that their test score is representative of their ability and have it included as part of their application process. The other thing to keep in mind with regards to SAT and ACT testing is there are states that require either the SAT or the ACT or have dictated one or the other as part of their graduation requirements. For example, North Carolina, Nevada, and Wisconsin, to name a few, are states that say, in order to meet graduation requirements, the student needs to take the ACT. There are other states, Colorado, Michigan, Illinois, as examples, that say, as a graduation requirement, the student is required to submit their SAT scores. Now, please keep in mind, just because a school district or a state requires a particular test as part of their graduation requirement, that does not mean that that is the best test for the student to take as part of their college admissions or application packages. For more information about SAT versus ACT, make sure you check out my video on this same channel, SAT versus ACT, saying yes to the right test, to get some insider information on which one the student should be doing. So yes, they should still take the SAT as part of their graduation requirement if they're in one of those states, but they could very easily be an ACT student where they're going to have a higher percentile score taking the ACT, and that would be better as part of their college applications. The other thing to keep in mind as we're discussing test optional colleges is what we have seen is a slight shift in the types of scores that are being submitted or the percentage score breakdown of what we see. Let's take, for example, XYZ University typically saw SAT scores of 1,200 as their middle percentile range, or an ACT of a 24. So then if you have a student coming in and they're like, hey, I want to apply to college to XYZ, and they're test optional, the student is going to say, am I at or above that 50th percentile mark of what this college typically sees? Well, then it's in my favor to submit my score. So if I have that 28 on the ACT, I'm going to submit it. If I have that 1,300 on the SAT, I'm going to submit it. So what that means is we're not seeing students that are submitting scores for these schools that are test optional when they're below that previous 50th percentile mark. So there's been a slight skew or a slight shift up in the test scores that are typically submitted to these schools that have gone test optional. So it's really important to keep that in mind and make sure that you're analyzing data to the schools that you're looking to apply to. When it comes to taking the test, again, we highly recommend that every student sit for either the SAT or the ACT twice in order to take advantage to super scoring, and making sure that the summer after they finish Algebra 2 is the best time to go ahead and focus on that, get it done early in the fall, move on and be done. That way, regardless to if a school is test blind, test optional, test recommended, or test required, the student is going to have the tools in place that they need in order to have a complete college application packet and be eligible for the most merit-based scholarship opportunities available to them moving forward. For any additional questions, please reach out to our team here at advisor@enhancedprep.com in order to get some more information or questions answered about what's best for you or your student. Thanks so much for joining me, and have a fantastic day.